Hey guys, this is the asynchronous video for Business Math B Unit 2. This week I've decided to focus on some concepts from Lesson 9. The reason I'm focusing on Lesson 9 specifically is that I've taught this class many times, and these are the topics that tend to be the most difficult for students because they're a little bit different from the style of concept that we usually see in class. And that includes three different ways of valuing inventory. And these are called the average cost method, the first in, first out, or FIFO method, and the last in, first out, LIFO method. Now, if there are other things that you struggled on from Unit 2, remember that I have plenty of other help videos available that are listed in the recording library, and you're welcome to view any of those, okay? However, this video, again, is specifically to, one, gain credit for your asynchronous assignment for week 2, and B, focusing on the most difficult concept historically for students from Unit 2, which are these concepts from Lesson 9. So let's get started. So first, we have the average cost method. And again, the average cost method is just a method for valuing inventory. Anyone who has a business that includes physical inventory, right, items that you have in stock, items that you have to order and keep in stock, items that you have to replace as they are sold, it's important to understand the value, as in the currency, the money amount, of the stock that you have and the stock that you've sold. But there's more than one way to calculate that, okay? Which is somewhat counterintuitive, right? We would think, well, these items must be worth a particular amount, so there must be only one way of counting up what they're worth, but that's not the case. So in today's lesson, guys, we're going to take a look at three different ways that you can value inventory. And what that means is, if I had the same inventory sheet that I was considering, and I applied each of these three methods that we're going to discuss to value that inventory list, you would come up with three different answers, okay? So again, method one is called the average cost valuation method. So let's take a look. Sal's Shoes is valuing its inventory of socks. On May 31st, Sal's had 56 pairs of socks on hand. What is the average cost per pair? So as sort of a warm-up, notice that the question here is not actually asking you about the value of inventory. It's asking you just what's the average cost per pair for each of these pairs of socks, okay? And this is kind of a foundational thing to be able to know how to do in order to do your average cost valuation, but we'll get to that. So for now, again, notice that the question is not asking us what's the inventory worth. It's just saying, based on this inventory list, what is the average cost per pair of socks? Okay, so remember, averaging this is going to be like averaging anything else. You know, if I, for example, wanted to take the average of test scores in students, I would add up the points. Like if I got an 86 and then you got 100 and then someone else got, I don't know, a 92, right? I would add up those three scores and then I would divide by 3, the number of students. So what am I doing? I'm adding up the number of points, or in this case it's going to be money that I'm adding up, and then you divide by the total number of units that you have, okay? So average cost per unit, the total cost of units, and that's of all units, divided by the total number of units, or number received. So you can see in this chart, it's telling me when my inventory came, what week it came in, the number of units that arrived. So that means on May 3rd, I received a shipment of 80 units, for example. And then the unit cost. So what that means is that, for example, for May 3rd, each of these 80 items cost $9.99. So if I want to find the average cost of all of the items listed here, I have to add up all of their costs, right? Just like, and this is kind of the same thing as saying, going back to like a test exam example, if 10 students got 100% on an exam, I would have to add up all of their 100s, right, and add them into my numerator, right, if I was going to average those scores with other students from the class. And that's the same thing here. So what I'm saying is, if I'm taking the average, that means I have to account for the cost of each of these units. So I could write out $9.99 plus $9.99 plus $9.99 and so on, right? I could write that out 80 times, but of course it's much faster just to write out 80 times $9.99. So this is representing the cost of each of those 80 units. But that's just for May 3rd, right? So I also have to add up the cost of the 75 units from May 10th, and each one of those costs $11.23. I also have to add up this cost of 69 units at $9.50 each. Okay. I also have to add up 99 units at $10.05 each, and I also have to add up the cost of 84 units at $9.18 each. Okay. So everything I've done so far is just finding the total cost of all units. Okay. So all of that becomes my numerator, the top of my fraction. Now, once I've done that, I'm going to divide by the number received. So units received is given right here, right? So I have 80 from the 3rd plus 75 on the 10th plus 69 plus 99 plus 84. So you can see that in this expression, I've accounted for the cost of every single unit, right? And I am totaling up the number of all units. Okay, so here that is just rewritten a little nicer. And from there I just simplify, and I find that the average cost per unit is $9.99. Okay? So remembering that that was the goal, just to find the average cost per pair of socks or per unit was what it was. We found that it's $9.98, so our work here is done. Okay? So in order to then use the average cost method to find value of inventory, which is the overall goal of this method, only takes one additional step, and we'll see that in the next example. But the more difficult, time-consuming part of these problems is just finding that average cost, okay? So if you understood this example, you'll definitely understand the average cost valuation method. Again, this was just sort of a warm-up question. So let's do one more example, but this time we'll take it a little bit further and we'll actually use the average cost that we determine to find the value of our inventory. Okay, so let's say JD's Furniture had an inventory of dining chairs, and on February 28th, the last day of the month, they had 177 chairs in stock. What is the value of the ending inventory for February using the average cost valuation method? Okay, so again, the question here, what is the value of the ending inventory using the average cost valuation method? Well, we know that the inventory value, in other words, what's the total amount of money that our remaining inventory is worth, in order to figure that out, we're just going to say, okay, well, what is the cost for those units, and then how many are there, right? So for example, if each unit cost $2 and I had 5 units left, you could easily multiply and tell me that the inventory I have on hand is worth $10, right? Now, since this is the average cost method, the value of inventory that we're going to use is going to be based on the average cost of all the units, okay? The average cost of all the units, that's what we practiced calculating in the last example. So to find the inventory value, the first thing we're going to have to do is going to be to find the average cost per unit, okay? Once we find the average cost per unit, we can then figure out the value of the ending inventory, because they've already told us, right? They've already told us that there are 177 chairs on hand. Okay, that's our number on hand. So all we have to do is figure out average cost per unit, which we can then plug into this formula for inventory value, okay, to find our final answer. So let's work on this step 1, finding the average cost per unit. Now remember, average cost per unit was equal to total cost of units divided by number received. So let's practice that again. If I want to find total cost of units, which I'll represent in green, what would I do? Well, remember, it's just going to be a matter of multiplying units received times their unit cost, okay? Units received times unit cost, but I'm going to do that for every inventory date that I have, right? So I have 66 units worth 110 each, and then I'm going to add that. Notice that I'm separating these phrases by addition. I'm going to add that to my 125 units at 108.66 a piece. then I'm going to add that to 19 times 129.38, and I'm going to add that to 180 times 112.45, okay? So simplifying and then adding each of these pieces together is going to tell me the total cost of all of my units. To get the denominator, the number received, I'm just going to add up all of these units received, right? So I'm going to take 66, so it's going to be all of this divided by 66 plus 125 plus 19 plus 180, okay? So to look at that a little nicer, you can see there, let me even erase my work so you can see it a little bit better. When you are typing this into a calculator, be very careful about where you place your parentheses, okay? I really recommend that you just simplify everything kind of step by step. Don't just try typing all of this in at once, okay? Unless you're a complete calculator master. I really recommend that you just break things down step by step. Okay, so we simplify this using a calculator, and we find that the average cost per unit is $111.64, okay? So that was step 1, just finding that average cost. Step 2 is plugging into inventory value. And again, we know that our inventory value is just going to be our average cost of $111.64 times the number on hand, and that comes out to $19,760. The prompt said to round up to the nearest dollar. This just so happened to work out completely even already, so the answer is $19,760. Okay? So that's average cost method. The only time you do what I just did is when the prompt tells you to use the average cost method of valuation. Okay, so time for our first activity. You are going to create your own average cost valuation problem, okay? So you are going to read this prompt and fill in the blanks, or fill in the capitalized yellow pieces with your own information. So you'll have to decide a company name, how many items they have, what number of the item they had left in stock, right? I went ahead and filled in all the information in the table just to make it easier and to save time. So step 1 is going to be that you fill in these blanks and then type out the question in full on the provided Google form to create your scenario. Okay, so you have to type out the full question to receive credit. The number that you pick right here where I say have number of item in stock, make that number between 1 and 82, okay? Reason being, I want you to have at least one thing in stock, but they only have a certain number of items in stock, so I don't want you to exceed 82, okay? So the number must be between 1 and 82. And then step 2, solve the problem, show all of your work, just as you saw me do on the previous slide. Show all of your work to receive full credit, okay? And that's activity 1. Okay, so we're going to move on to the first in, first out method. So this is the second of 3 types of inventory valuation that I'm going to demonstrate. So what we just did was the average cost method. This is the first in, first out method. Okay, so FIFO stands for first in, first out. And what that means is that I'm going to sell my first inventory first, or in other words, my older inventory first. So imagine you were working at like an ice cream shop and you started making ice cream cones. You know, you see that there's a long line, so you think, you know what, I'll get ahead and I'll just start making ice cream cones. You would want to get rid of the oldest ice cream cone first, right, before it melts. Think of this the same way, and you could really think of any food in general in this way. The food that's been on the shelf the longest is the food the store that wants to sell, right? So the idea is that if I had a box, let's say, for example, these dates are June 1st, June 8th, June 15th. Let's say I have a box that says June 1st, a box that says June 8th, and a box that says June 15th. If someone came in and ordered something, I would pull from that June 1st box because this is the first in, first out method. And I would not even open my June 8th box until the June 1st box was completely empty. And I would not even open my June 15th box until that June 8th box was also empty. Okay? So now let's read the prompt and take it from there. So Food and Stuff uses the FIFO method to find the cost of goods sold and the value of ending inventory. The table records the number of units received in the month of June. On June 30th, they sold 102 hammers. What was the cost of goods sold? So as always, start by identifying your question, okay? With these problems and these tables and different valuation methods, there's a couple different things that they'll ask you about, okay? So don't go on autopilot and assume, oh, I see FIFO method, I know what they're going to ask me, okay? This question is asking, what is the cost of goods sold? So they tell me that 102 hammers were sold, so I have to find the cost of these 102 hammers. Imagine it like this. Imagine that they have all of these items in full stock, okay? So they received 45 hammers on June 1st, 15 on the 8th, 68 on the 15th. Imagine that all of my boxes, my June 1st box, my June 8th box, my June 15th box, are all full, and that just some eccentric person walks in on the last day of June and says, hey, I want to buy 102 hammers. We need to figure out the cost of those 102 hammers, and that's going to be based on what date or what shipment they're from, because notice that the unit cost for each date is different, right? It's not significantly different, but it is different, and so that's going to affect our cost, okay? So the first thing we have to figure out is, so where does this inventory come from, this 102 hammers? Remember, if someone walked in and said, hey, I want 102 hammers, the first box I'm going to look into is my June 1st box, because this is the first in, first out method, okay? This was the first inventory in, so it's the first inventory out, the first inventory I sell. So I go to my box, and I pull out all 45 hammers, and I give them to this person. Okay, so they wanted 102. So far, I have given out 45. But a 45, that's way short of 102, right? I haven't filled this order. So even though my June 1st box is empty, I still have to keep going. So next I go to my June 8th box, okay, and I pull out all 15 hammers, and I give them to this person. So now my June 8th box is empty, right? So now I have also taken out 15 more hammers. 45 plus 15, what? That is 60, right? So far I have only given this person 60 hammers, but they asked for 102, so I have 42 hammers to go, right? So next, my June 1st, my June 8th box, those are empty. I go to my June 15th box, okay? And I'm going to pull out, I still need to give them 42 more hammers. I'm going to give them 42 hammers from June 15th, okay? So they're getting 45 hammers from the June 1st box, 15 hammers from the June 8th box, and 42 hammers from the June 15th box. That's the hard part of the question. So if you can kind of reason your way through that, if that all made sense, then you're going to be golden on how to do this. Now it's just a matter of figuring out the cost of all of those. And this is no different from how we figured out total cost before, okay? So if I want to know, and I'm just going to have to add everything up separately because each of these is worth a different amount, okay? So I can't just say 102 times some unit cost because my items have different unit costs. Instead, I'm going to add them up separately, right? So I am going to figure out the cost of the June 1st inventory, which is the number of units sold times unit cost. In other words, I'm going to take 45, I sold all 45 of those hammers, I'm going to multiply by 998, okay, and that's going to give me the total cost of that June 1st inventory. I'm going to do the same thing with June 8th and June 15th. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with June 8th and June 15th. So I'm going to find those individual costs for each of those dates, and then I'm just going to add them all together. So if I take 45 times 998, okay, and then for June 8th, I'll do 15, right? I sold all 15 of those hammers, times 887, the unit cost for that date. And then for June 15th, remember, I did not sell all 68 of those hammers. I only sold 42. So then I take 42 times the unit cost of 876. Okay, so simplifying, this number 45 times 998 works out to 449.10. The June 8th inventory turned out to be 133.02, and then 42 times 876 turned out to be 367.92. So these are each the individual cost from each date. So I'm just going to take the total. And the value, or the cost of my goods sold, was $950.07. Okay? Now the flip side of that, I just figured out what was the cost of the goods that I sold. What if I want to know the cost of the goods that I still have in stock? So this is the exact same thing. All of this information is the same. The only thing I've changed is the question, what's the value of the remaining inventory? So again, our last example, we used the first in, first out method to figure out the cost of the goods that I sold. In this example, we're going to figure out the cost of the goods that are still in stock. Fortunately, we already did most of the work to figure out this problem. Because to figure out the value of the remaining inventory, I have to ask myself, okay, well, what inventory remains? But we already figured out in the last example that I sold all 45 of those from June 1st. I sold all 15 from June 8th. And I sold, I think it was 42. I sold 42 from June 15th. So the only stuff I have remaining in stock is a couple of hammers from June 15th. So 68 minus 42 gives us 26. So the only inventory remaining is 26 hammers from June 15th. Okay? If I want to know the value of that inventory, it's just like before. I need to multiply the number of units, not units sold, number of units, times unit cost. So I'm going to multiply 26 times my unit cost of 876. Okay, that's my unit cost for that inventory date. And that's a typo there. Sorry about that, guys. That should be 876. So 26 times 876, and I'm guessing I must have written the wrong calculation there, so let's calculate it ourselves. Let me pull up a calculator here. Let's see. My calculator is loading slowly. Sorry about this, guys. So we will take 26 times 876, and the correct answer is 227.76. Okay. The correct answer is 227.76. Okay. So again, we just figured out what is the value. 227.76. We figured out what's left in stock. Okay, well, it's 26 hammers from June 15th, and we took that number, we multiplied it by the unit cost for that date, and the answer is 227.76. Okay. Let's do one more first in, first out method, and we'll do it a little bit quicker. Okay. So let's say Mindy's Music uses the first in, first out method to find the cost of goods sold and the value of ending inventory. The table records the number of units received in the month of September. On September 30th, they sold 44 metronomes. What was the cost of goods sold? So first, again, really there are, I would say, two very, very, very important pieces of information. The first one is that we're talking about the first in, first out method. And the second thing is that they ask for cost of goods sold. Okay? That is not the only important information, but those are the two key things that are going to tell you how to start your problem. What method is it, and what are they asking us to solve for? Now, the next important thing to notice is that they say that they sold 44 metronomes, okay? They sold 44 metronomes. So we need to figure out, where did those 44 metronomes come from? Since this is the first in, first out method, we know that the first box we would go to fill an order of 44 metronomes would be September 1st. Okay, so I would sell all 15 of these, and then I would say, okay, well, 15, that still leaves me pretty short of 44 metronomes, right? So where must I have pulled from next? Well, we would have definitely gone to September 8th next, right? And we would have sold all 20 of those metronomes before going into September 15th. So far, that accounts for 35 metronomes, right? So that means we would have to go into our September 15th pile. So far we've sold 35. Oh, that's correct. I don't know why I crossed that out. 35. So we have 9 to go. So we would have sold 9 metronomes from the September 15th pile, okay? So again, 15 metronomes from September 1st, 20 metronomes from September 8th, and then we would have pulled the last 9 from September 15th. So that's where our inventory comes from, okay, and that's definitely the most difficult part of the problem. So if you didn't understand that, just pause, maybe rewind the video, and make sure you understand how we figured that out. Now it's just a matter of figuring out the cost. So we're going to have to figure out the cost for each individual inventory date, okay, so we'll take our 15 units, each cost $15.05, and we'll figure out the total cost for those units, right? So the cost of the September 1st inventory. We'll do the same thing for September 8th and September 15th. So remember, that's just a matter of taking the number of units sold, which I've circled the number in blue, and then multiplying by the corresponding unit cost. So that means we would do 15 times 15.05 for September 1st, 20 units times 15.01 for September 8th, and 9 units times 14.82 for September 15th. Okay, so simplifying each of these pieces, we get 225.75 plus 320 plus 133.38. We add it all together, we get 659.33. Okay, so the cost of goods sold was 659.33. Okay, and again, let's look at the flip side of that, looking at the exact same example, but we want to know what's the value of the remaining inventory. Well, again, they sold 44 metronomes, and we already figured out that that would mean that all 15 of these would be gone, all 20 of these would be gone, and we would have sold 9 of the September 15th metronomes, right? That's stuff we already figured out in the last slide. So that means we still have 27 metronomes from our September 15th box, right? So to figure out the value of the remaining inventory, well, there are 27 remaining from September 15th. So we're just going to take the number of units multiplied by the unit cost. In other words, we're going to take 27 times 14.82. And that gives us $400.14. Okay, so again, that's the first in, first out method, where you sell oldest inventory, all oldest inventory from a particular date before moving on to sell the inventory from the next recent date. We're going to get to you're only going to have one more asynchronous activity that you have to complete, but I'm not going to introduce it until I do an example with last in, first out. Okay, so there will be another activity, just not yet. So the third method of valuing inventory, so far you have seen the average cost method and the first in, first out method. If you understand the first in, first out method, I think you will certainly understand the last in, first out method. It's just kind of like backwards, okay? So we just did first in, first out. This is last in, first out method of valuing inventory. If I look at my inventory dates, October 1st, 10th, and 20th, well, once again, let's just draw, let's say you have these boxes that have shredders in them, okay? Because that's the item we're selling. So let's say we have an October 1st box that has 150 shredders in it. We have an October 10th box that has 75 shredders in it. And we have an October 20th box that has another 75 shredders in it. If we're talking about the last in, first out method, it means we sell the most recent inventory first, okay? So you would go to your October 20th inventory and you would empty that box, and then you would work your way backwards in your inventory. I don't actually have a concrete example of a business that would do this. This is a weird way of valuing inventory. So again, think of this as the opposite of first in, first out, right? If I asked you to value inventory using the first in, first out method, you would start counting your units from October 1st, right? So you can see, so it's important that you are very clear on which method you are using, because it's easy to kind of scramble things and get them backwards, okay? So just double check your work when you do these. So again, last in, first out method, starting with the newest inventory, working our way backwards. So if we're looking, it says Sabre uses the last in first out method of valuing inventory. On October 31st, they sold 175 shredders. Find the cost of goods sold. So once again, key is that we're finding the cost of goods that we sold and that we're using the last in first out method. Also important to know that they sold 175 shredders. Okay? So I need to figure out, just like before, where is this inventory coming from? Again, since this is the last in first out method, I am going to start at October 20th. Okay, so again, let's just pretend, and this isn't necessarily what the question is saying, but I feel like it's just easiest for me to imagine it this way. I picture that some person, some eccentric person, comes in on October 31st and they say, hey, I want 175 shredders. And so I imagine, okay, what if I had to fill this order of 175 shredders? How would I do it? Well, the first box I would go to is my October 20th box, right? And I would pull out all 75 shredders and I would put them out for this person, right? So my October 20th box is now empty. I have sold all 75 of them. Next, I go to my October 10th box because I still have not hit 175 yet, right? And I empty out all 75 of those shredders. Okay? I bring them out for this customer. So far, I have sold only 150 shredders, right? So I still have 25 to go. So these 75 came from October 20th, and those 75 came from October 10th. So there's still 25 that I have to go get. So my October 10th box is empty. So I go to October 1st and I say, all right, I still need 25 more shredders. So I pull 25 shredders from October 1st, okay? So that's where the inventory is coming from. I've got 75 from October 20th, 75 from October 10th, and 25 from October 1st. Next, I just have to value this inventory, each of the unit numbers for its particular unit cost, okay? So that means I'm going to look at the cost of October 20th. I'm going to multiply how many I sold, which is 75, times the unit cost of $32.97. And I'm going to do the same thing for October 10th and for October 1st. I'm going to take 75 times $33.78, and I'm going to take 25 times $35.02. Okay, and so that's what you see written here. Be very careful about, this date where you always have leftover inventory. Be careful to multiply. In this example, it's appropriate to multiply by 25 because we sold 25 from that date, right? This 150 number is no longer relevant for this example. So I'm going to carry out those multiplications, right? So 75 times 32.97 gave me 24.72.75, and so on, right? I just simplified each of these phrases. Okay, so I'm summing the inventory values from those three dates, and I get $5,881.75. Okay, so using the last in first out method, that's the cost of goods sold for October. Our last quick example is going to be finding the value of remaining inventory. This is going to work the exact same way when we did the examples with first in first out. It's just a matter of figuring out where our remaining inventory comes from. So, again, the same exact example, but the question is just now asking what's the value of the remaining inventory. So in the last slide, we figured out that since this is the last in first out method, we started with October 20th. We emptied out that box, we emptied out the October 10th box, and then we used, I think it was 25 from the October 1st box. So that means we still had 125 shredders left in stock, and they were all from this October 1st date, right? So we're going to take that number, that 125, the number of units left. So this is the number of units remaining, not the number of units sold. And we're going to multiply by our unit cost of $35.02. So that's 125 times $35.02, and that comes out to $4,377.50. So that brings us to our second activity. Just like before, you're going to be filling in some information to create your own problem, and then you're going to solve it. So step 1, I want you to fill in the blanks. So fill in the company name, You get to decide if you want to use the last in, first out, or first in, first out method. Just pick one and stick to it, okay? Then you'll decide the number and what the item is, okay? And feel free to be creative or silly with this. My only restraint on the number, I want it to be between 56 and 197. One more time. Whatever number you fill in here, I want it to be between 56 and 197, okay? That's something I've decided just because it's going to help me. Numbers in that range will help me make sure that you're understanding the method that you're using, okay? And I'll leave it at that. So to complete this activity, fill in the information. Remember, keep that number between 56 and 197. And then write out the complete question. You don't have to write out this table. I just need you to write the text, okay? Then solve your problem and show your work, okay? And that's it. So you just have 2 activities this week for your asynchronous session. Now, if you feel like you want to see more examples of first in, first out, last in, first out, average cost, remember that they are available to you in the recording library. I think I just have them listed under, it's called like topic video section, and the titles will literally say average cost method, first in, first out, last in, first out. So feel free to pull those up and watch those videos if you want to see more examples of this stuff. And if you want to see examples of other stuff in Unit 2 that I didn't talk about today, go to that same recording library, fish around there. I have plenty of other topic videos that cover the material in this unit. So that's it for this week, guys. I'll see you next week for Unit 3.